Sun Zhongshan died on March 15th, 1926. He left behind a political party internally divided and considered irrelevant by most of the world. Although he left a will outlining his hopes and goals for the party, he did not designate a successor, nor was there any legal framework outlining the rules of succession. Vying for control of the party state, world comrades, his son, and the leading party apparatchiks. On nobody's radar was the leader of the Guomindang's military academy, Jiang Jieshi. Before I get started, I want to clarify some terminology. Jiang Jieshi is commonly known in English as Chiang Kai-shek, a combination of the Wade-Jiao system of transliteration and the Cantonese pronunciation of his name. Many English historians nowadays like to use the modern pinyin system of transliteration for most Chinese names, while keeping the old forms for names that were very well known, like Beijing and Sun Yat-sen. Personally, I believe one should pick a system and stick with it, and eventually the modern terms become well known too, like Beijing. Jiang was from a merchant family, based near Shanghai. He attended a military academy in Japan in hopes it would help him learn to fight Manchu rule. While there, he met Sun Zhongshan and joined the Proto-Guomindang. He returned to China to fight in the 1911 revolution. Although he didn't play a major role, while fighting in Shanghai, he developed strong ties with the Green Gang, a Shanghai criminal organization that opposed the Qing dynasty. Jiang remained a loyal party member through all of Sun Zhongshan's ups and downs, but never in a prominent or important position, until the founding of the Guomindang Communist United Front and the establishment of a Guomindang state in Guangzhou in 1923, when Sun Zhongshan sent him into Moscow to learn about the Soviet system. And then, when Jiang returned, appointed him head of the Huangpo Military Academy. Sun was impressed with Jiang's leadership, so when Sun traveled to Beijing to negotiate with the new warlord government, he left Jiang Jieshi in control of all GMD armies, and made him head of the new military department. While Sun was away, Jiang decided to embark on the first real test of the Guomindang's new army, and consolidate the party's hold on Guangdong province by attacking the nearby warlord Chen Zhongming, Sun Zhongshan's old rival. Chen lost every battle, but was able to maintain his territory and army, while Jiang eventually had to withdraw. But that campaign provided some much-needed experience for the GMD's troops and officers, as well as testing the cooperation between the Chinese officers and their Soviet advisors. Jiang worked closely with the leader of the Russian military expedition, Galen, calling him an outstanding general, as well as a reasonable man and a close friend. When Sun Zhongshan died without a successor, those in Beijing with him fought to take control. Eventually, his son, Sun Ke, was edged out by a coalition of high-ranking party members. A triumvirate was established of the left-wing Liao Zhongkai, the right-wing Hu Hanmin, and the center-left Wang Jingwei, with Wang as first among equals due to his higher prestige as a revolutionary. The fourth man of the triumvirate was Soviet emissary Mikhail Borodin, who had been Sun's closest advisor for the past year. Sun Ke backed down peacefully, but the first major succession crisis hit before the new leaders could even return to Guangzhou. Tang Jiao was the governor of Yunnan province, which was allied with the Guomindang. Tang had been a major leader in Sun Zhongshan's constitutional protection movements, as well as the National Protection War against Yuan Shikai 10 years earlier. As Tang saw it, he was the last living member of the old guard of the revolutionaries, and the natural choice to follow Sun. More importantly, as ruler of Yunnan, he had his own army, and sent it towards Guangzhou to enforce his claim. With the Guomindang's leaders still in transit, Jiang Jieshi was left to organize the defense of the city, and he built up a new ally to do it. To get to Guangzhou, the Yunnanese army had to travel through Guangxi province. The old Guangxi clique had been destroyed when Sun Zhongshan took over Guangzhou, but shortly before Yunnan attacked, a new Guangxi clique had been consolidated by the warlord Li Zhongren. Jiang negotiated an alliance with Li in exchange for official recognition, and Li's troops did most of the fighting to repel Tang Jiyao. Tang was beaten, but Yunnan was no longer an ally. As the Guomindang's standing army developed, it found it had less and less need for the mercenary companies that had once propped it up. But as mercenaries were dismissed, they generally didn't just leave the city. They formed gangs, and the murder rate increased dramatically. In May, Jiang Jieshi finally sacked all the mercenaries, and a minor civil war erupted as they refused to leave the city. They were beaten quickly, but the additional chaos only contributed to decreasing wages and rising unemployment to make Guangzhou's position precarious. Victory against the mercenaries also increased Jiang Jieshi's prestige in the city, but also led to secret, anonymous messages warning him that politicians were discussing ways of restraining him. Shortly after Liao, Hu, and Wang arrived back in Guangzhou, the May 30th movement erupted. The May 30th movement, which I discussed in the previous video in this series, was a strike and protest movement centered in Shanghai, but which spread throughout China, including to Guangzhou. Massive strikes broke out. In neighboring Hong Kong, British troops fired upon protesters, killing 52. The Guomindang's broad membership put it in a difficult position. Membership in both it and the Communist Party rose, as people saw them as the only alternative to imperialism. But while the left wing of the party called for war against Britain, the right wing, and Guangzhou's merchant class, became more nervous about the increasing power of the communists. The GMD tried to reach a compromise by sponsoring strikes while avoiding violence, but it didn't make anybody happy. Within the governing triumvirate, Hu Hanmin had started to be sidelined from the very beginning. He was the anti-Russia right-winger, while Liao and Wang both supported the Soviet alliance and were seen as left-wing. Borodin and the Soviet Union were integral to the functioning of the party state, and the increasingly prominent Jiang Jieshi was in close terms with the Soviet military advisors. Also, Hu's official role in the government was Foreign Affairs Minister, but the only foreign state to recognize the Guomindang was the Soviet Union. In the summer of 1925, Liao Zhongkai began an anti-corruption campaign in the party, which is seen by the right wing as a direct attack. The right wing was composed of a lot of the party's old money, which potentially had the most to lose. In response, the right wing engaged in a propaganda drive to portray the rest of the Guomindang as communist puppets. They convinced routers that in northern Guangdong, peasants were taking over the land and nationalizing women. Hu Hanmin's brother published a newspaper calling for the elimination of Liao and Wang. The British governor of Hong Kong was so convinced he, unsuccessfully, petitioned Parliament for funding to mount a campaign to suppress the Reds. Finally, on August 20th, Liao Zhongkai was shot and killed while leaving his office. One of the assassins was killed by a guard, and on him was found a list of members of a secret society run by Hu Hanmin's brother. Martial law was declared, and 100 people were arrested, but Hu's brother and most of the society members managed to escape. Hu Hanmin, however, was caught. There was no actual evidence connecting Hanmin to the murder, but everyone assumed he must have been involved. So, unable to legally punish him, the government named Hu ambassador to the Soviet Union and shipped him off to Moscow. With Liao dead and Hu exiled, the old triumvirate was over, but a new one took its place. While Wang was now legally the sole leader of the Guomindang, Jiang Jieshi had become so influential in the party that he was now seen as a close second. And without a right wing opposing him, Borodin became even more important. For the rest of 1925, Wang and Borodin ruled together, while Jiang left the city to personally lead the army. It was renamed the National Revolutionary Army, and sent to finally finish off Chen Jiangming, who eventually fled to Hong Kong and died of typhus. Wang's priority was to re-establish stability in Guangzhou. he hired Sun Zhongshan's brother-in-law, the Harvard-educated Song Ziwen, to manage the party's finances, and his streamlining of the tax system, combined with the increased tax base resulting from Jiang Jieshi's conquests, resulted in the tax take doubling between 1924 and 26. Wang was so busy as party leader, he didn't have time to do his job as propaganda minister, and he appointed the communist Mao Zedong as acting GMD propaganda minister, where he got his first experience writing government agitprop. In November, a group of right-wing GMD members became so upset with the leftward turn of the party that they held their own party congress at the Western Hills near Beijing, in which they appointed themselves the CEC and expelled all the communists. Seeing Jiang Jieshi as the less left-wing member of the GMD government, they focused all their criticisms at Wang Jingwei and the CCP, and they released leaflets in Guangzhou denouncing Jiang, which were credited to the communists. If Jiang was convinced, he didn't show it now, and he wrote a letter supporting Wang, Borodin, and the CCP. In the January elections, Jiang Jieshi was finally made a leading member of the CEC, giving him actual legal power. The betrayal of the Western Hills Group only brought the left and the center closer together, and at the January Party Congress, delegates wore hammer and sickle banners, while Soviet planes flew information over the city. But the right wing was far from finished in the GMD. Even from Moscow, Hu Hanmin still won a CEC seat in the election. Jiang began networking with wealthy right-wingers, and a friend of his told a reporter in Shanghai, Jiang was anything but red, and that when the time was ripe, he would make evident his hatred of Bolshevism and the Bolshevists. Zhou Enlai, who had worked closely with Jiang at Huangpo Academy, warned Borodin that, without naming any names, some leading figures may not be as friendly as you think they are. But Borodin wasn't worried. Even if Jiang didn't like the communists, he is so connected with us that the possibility of a rupture on his part can hardly be admitted. In early 1926, Jiang hired as his secretary Chen Lifu, a right-winger who, along with his brother, Chen Guofu, would eventually form the hard-right CC clique within the Guomindang. Disagreements arose between Jiang and Wang Jingwei over the power political workers should have in the army. In February, Borodin and Galen traveled north for a secret meeting with Soviet delegates about the future of their China policy. With the Soviet leaders gone, there was nobody to moderate the debates between Wang and Jiang, and the two grew distrustful of each other. Jiang had been friendly with Galen, but he grew to hate the three Soviet military advisors left in charge when Galen left, seeing them as overbearing in their control of Russian aid. As the centrist, Jiang alienated both the left and the right in the party, and grew less popular in Guangzhou. He claimed to have discovered multiple assassination plots against him, and wrote that he suffered extreme pain and anxiety. Eventually, he declared a curfew, setting armed police to patrol the city, and drew up a list of known communists. As Jiang fought more with the Soviet advisors, he began to worry that they and Wang Jingwei might be conspiring to have him removed. Then, on March 18th, Wang Jingwei's wife, Chen Bijun, called Jiang's home on behalf of her husband, who was ill. Jiang was out, and his wife, Chen Jieru, answered, and Bijun asked what her husband's plans for the day were. When Jiang's wife didn't know, Chen Bijun called back 5 times later with the same question. Jieru found this odd. She recalled, "It was well known that the haughty Bijun never did anything without a purpose, so the more I thought of it, the more suspicious I became." When Jieru told Jiang when he got home, he called the Huangpo Academy, and was told there was a ship there, the Zhongshan, lying offshore. The captain of the Zhongshan was a known communist, and Jiang grew suspicious, so he avoided Huangpo for the next 2 days. Around midnight on the 19th, an old friend and communist arrived at his house, where they had a secret conversation. On the morning of the 20th, the boat was still there, and Jiang's house had received even more mysterious calls from Bijun and other party officials asking where he was. Jiang became convinced this was all part of a communist plot to kidnap him and ship him off to Russia. He decided on a preemptive strike. He declared martial law, sending troops to surround the train station and central bank. Communists throughout the city were arrested, including the Zhongshan's captain, the chief of naval affairs, and Zhou Enlai. Russians in the city were placed under protective custody. Wang Jingwei actually was ill and wasn't able to respond. He was accused of conspiring with the communists and placed under house arrest. And then, Jiang stepped back. Jiang Jieshi wanted to take power and remove threats. He didn't want to lose his alliance with Russia. But he was the first GMD leader since 1923 to realize that the Soviets needed a Chinese ally as much as the Guomindang needed their aid. After putting himself in a position where he could take complete power for himself, Jiang showed his goodwill by offering to negotiate. He freed the communists and declared everything had been a misunderstanding. He claimed that all reports of his being hostile to the USSR or CCP was the work of running dogs of imperialists. Jiang judged correctly. While most members of the Chinese Communist Party wanted to stand and fight, the Soviets believed that Jiang's willingness to negotiate showed that he did need them, that this was primarily a struggle between him and Wang, and they had invested too much time and resources into the GMD to pull out now. The Soviets didn't trust Jiang, but they assumed he wouldn't dare turn on them. The Soviets agreed to recall the three advisors Jiang hated, and they said nothing when communists were banned from leadership positions within the Guomindang. Communists were not allowed to criticize the party or its leader, or recruit within the GMD, and had to provide the Guomindang with a list of its members. In exchange, some prominent conservatives were also banned from the party. Jiang even officially apologized to Wang Jingwei, and drafted a letter of resignation for his mistakes. The CEC, which Jiang had already stacked with his own people, begged him not to resign, and then suggested that Wang Jingwei take a long trip to France to recover from his illness. The CEC then appointed Jiang Supreme Commander of the Guomindang, Generalissimo. As part of the negotiations, Borodin had to acquiesce to Soviet support for a northern expedition, a war against the warlords to reunify China. While such a campaign was always desired by the Soviets, they had been very skeptical that it could be accomplished anytime soon. To enable this, and to cement the resumption of the alliance, the USSR shipped a new load of weapons to the Guomindang. The Chinese Communist Party tried to convince him to divert some of the weapons to them, just in case. But Borodin wasn't willing to do anything to risk Guomindang support. In the north, the Guomindang-friendly Feng Yuxiang was on the ropes against the warlords Zhang Zuolin and Wu Peifu, whose armies were largely fighting in China's distant northwest. They seemed vulnerable, and in June 1926, the Northern Expedition finally began. So, was there actually a conspiracy to abduct Jiang Jieshi and take him to Moscow? We can't know for sure. Certainly all the phone calls were very suspicious, and we don't know what Jiang and the communists discussed that midnight before the coup. But a communist-helmed ship off the coast of a major port and the country's communist headquarters isn't all that weird. And the mysterious calls after the first few could be explained by people wondering, where is the second in command of the government? He was hiding away to avoid a non-existent coup, while the head of government is sick. We can say that no documentation of a planned kidnapping has ever been found in any Soviet archive.